just open your paints, and I want you to paint 3 primary colors, and I want you to paint their complements next to them. I'm going to do blue and orange, so I'm probably going to take my cadmium orange and my cobalt blue, and I'm just going to put a little bit. I'm not even going to use my palette. I'm going to put these directly onto the paper. Let's take cobalt and put it next to it. So I'm just going to put a little dab of cobalt right here. Now, you'll see more vibration between complements if the value is the same, right? So how can I make this cobalt blue the same value as the orange? They're quite a bit different in value, right? Naturally. So blue is naturally darker than orange, correct? Therefore, to get the value up, I'm going to take a little bit of white and I'm going to mix it into my blue. Actually, I'm not going to do that. What am I going to do? Mix my blue into my white. Right? So I've laid down a splotch of white. I'm actually just going right on the paper. I'm not even worrying about my palette right now. I have a splotch of white and I'm going to mix some blue into it. I have a desaturated tinted blue, and I have a pure blue, and I have an orange. How do I tell if I'm at the same value? If you look at the blue that I made here, and I get my paintbrush full of it, and I hold it over top of my orange, and I squint at it, squinting sort of helps me to take some information away, right? Squinting is helping me to get rid of the color and just see the value. So I'm really trying now to only see the lightness and darkness of these colors, right? So I'm holding my paintbrush over it and I'm looking, I'm not touching the paper. This is up above the page. I'm just holding it over and I'm squinting at it and I'm trying to see if they're the same light to dark. And I see that it's a little bit lighter still. This blue is lighter than that orange, isn't it? Right? So this one's darker, that one's lighter. So I'm going to keep going. I'm going to pull some blue over into this blue. I'm not pulling it into the white anymore, of course. I'm just pulling it into the color I had mixed before to mix a darker blue. Get my paintbrush all saturated in that and then hold that over. Look how I'm much closer now in terms of light to dark, right? I think I'm still a little bit lighter than that orange, aren't I? Dip in the water and I'm going to pull a little bit more cobalt. I'm just going to come right over into this cobalt now. I'm going to start mixing this blue. I may need to squeeze out a little more cobalt. But see how I'm going step by step by step? So if you look here, I've got white, and then I've got a light blue, and then I've got a medium blue, and then I've got a darker blue, and then I've got clear down to my cobalt. So I'm kind of working across my palette this way where I take this and then I go that. So it's really good if I can separate these and kind of keep them all separate. I usually can't. I'm going to confess that this is not something I do when I'm painting all the time. Like there's sort of a balance between how anal you want to be about what you're thinking and working with, and then how much fun you want to have with it, right? So the exercises that we're doing are like, we want to get really technical with it, right? We want to really understand how to mix paint colors. We want to really know that everything is right. So we're doing this stuff before we start the fun part to get this all worked out, right? All right, so now if I hold that paintbrush over top of that, it looks darker. You see how the blue looks darker than the orange? Is it about the same? Squint at it and see if you can get it to disappear. It's a tiny bit darker, but I'm getting closer, aren't I? So I guess it's between this one and that one. So now I'm going to take my paintbrush back into this one. I think this one was closer. Lighten it up just a little bit. Hold that over. Squint at it. I'm getting something closer. So now I'm going to paint that next to the orange. I want you to do an exercise in looking, okay? So what I want you to do is I want you to just sit and look at the blue against the orange for a minute. Just stare at the line between. In your eye, you're going to see that there's like a third line happening, right? There's sort of like a red line, or there's something that happened between it. The other thing you can do is if you stare at this for a minute, and then you look at the white paper, you're going to see a shadow of it, right? So the color theorists did this thing where if I paint a big swatch of orange, have you guys ever stood in front of the color field paintings in the museum and just stared at like a great big orange painting or a great big red painting? You know who Rothko is, right? So you stand in front of Rothko's painting and you just stare at it for a minute. And then you look at the wall next to it, and what do you see? The complement. If you stare at a red painting for a long time and then you look up at a white wall, you'll see green. If you stare at orange for a long time and you look up at a white wall, you'll see blue. So that's what artists are talking about when they say your eye craves a certain color, or this color palette needs blue or green, right? So the reason the complements work for us, or the reason that we call them complements, even though they're fighting each other on the page a little bit, right? So it's kind of this weird dialogue that I want to just point out, that a color complement is a complement because your eye sort of is trying to create a neutral gray. This is a neutral gray. So if I were setting up my lighting in the studio or something, or if I wanted to make sure that this color was reading correctly, I could fill most of the camera lens with this gray because the camera will read for this gray, and now you're seeing this color correctly because the camera is correcting for the light for this gray tone, right? If I have all my sheet of paper white, what happens is it grays everything down because it's trying to create this tone of gray as it's reading, okay? So I don't know if that makes a lot of sense to you, but what happens when you put if I were to fill the camera with this blue, you wouldn't get an accurate reading of the blue unless I put a blue up with an orange, and then you get a more accurate reading of both of them, okay? This doesn't just happen with the camera, this happens with your eyes as well, all right? So your eye craves contrast. You want, and also as an artist, because we know good design is a combination of contrast and harmony, right? So the contrast we want to talk about and work with this week is complementary. And the other contrast, or the other color scheme we were talking about, is an analogous color scheme. So you're using colors that are next to each other in the color wheel. Your contrast there may be in value. It also may be in hue because you're going to change the colors, but it probably, if you want a high contrast, if you want to get a lot of contrast or have it read like there's a lot of contrast, then I'm going to recommend you get a contrast of warm and cool, right? So here in this painting that I made so far, I have a contrast of warm and cool, don't I? Warm colors are fire, sun, light, that kind of thing, yellow, orange, and red. Cool colors are mixed with blues. So blues, greens, purples. Now, you can't really just say purple is a cool color, can you? Because you can make a warm purple and you can make a cool purple. You can make a warm green and you can make a cool green. So all the colors, if you're looking for warm, cool contrast, remember that color is relative. What I mean when I say color is relative is that it depends on what color it's laid next to. So I might have this blue color mixed on my palette and say, oh, this is a light blue, right? But if this is the darkest blue in my painting, it's going to read like a dark blue, right? This blue right here that I have, I might think is cobalt, and that's a pretty dark blue, right? But if I take some blue out of the tube and put that next to it, then you don't see that as dark blue anymore. You see it as medium blue. All right. So being next to the orange changes the way you see it. If I put that blue next to a yellow, it's going to look a little bit different. If I put it next to a green, it's going to look a little bit different, of course, right? So we'll talk more about color relativity later on in the quarter when we get better with understanding nuances of color. Right now, we don't want to do any nuance. We want to just do very simple and very stark color contrasts. I can reduce the vibration. So if I put a desaturated blue, for instance, if I take this cloud blue and I put that up against the orange, there's less of a vibration between this orange and that blue than there is between this orange and that blue, right? Because I desaturated the blue. Okay, so the more intense your colors are, the more they're going to vibrate. Some people might say they're going to fight, right? That vibration between them is the colors fighting each other. I don't know that that's a good word because it sounds negative, right? Vibration can be good. If you want a high contrast, like if I'm making a billboard and I want it to be read as people pass on the freeway very quickly, complementary colors are a really high contrast, and it's going to snap in quickly so that it's a really good graphic design color combination is the complementary combination, right? Complementary scheme. The analogous scheme is going to be harder to read, but people might think it's more pretty because it has more unity or it has more harmony. And so if you're like it depends on what you're trying to sell too, right? You want it to have a pop look or you want it to have a bright, fun, fresh look. And you might go with complements where if you wanted to have a more sophisticated look and you knew that everybody thought color neutrals and black, white, and gray was sophisticated, then you might go with analogous so that you have less of their eye to do to work with or to work on in that kind of thing, right? Now, just because I said color complements, I want you to do one of your homework assignments in a color complementary scheme. Doesn't mean that you have to do cobalt blue and cadmium orange, right? This is a color complement idea, right? I'm doing blue and orange, but I'm changing the blue and I'm changing the orange. So these aren't really just straight out of the tube.